Good morning, everyone. As we discussed on Friday, last class, while we still transition from Ayin Beis to Samach Vav, and we're simply waiting to make the announcements and give many people an opportunity, whoever wants to begin this new expedition with us, give them the opportunity to do so, which will be, I would say, next few days. I'll give you a heads up when we're ready to go. So we decided that we'll have a Stum the Rabbi, or what was it called when we were in camp on Carnival Day? They would have what was it, Splash the Counselor or something, throwing water balloons at the counselors. Anyway, whatever you want to call it, open session for any questions you may want to ask, any burning questions, as Yitzchak posted on the group. So some people did write to me some questions, and I will address them, but I'll open it up to the floor here. I want to begin by dedicating this class to the dear uncle of Robin Blumenthal, David ben Shimon HaKohen. Today is his yahrzeit. So we dedicate this class and all the learning and everything that takes place here, our synergy, our interaction and exchanges, to, again, David ben Shimon HaKohen, uncle of our colleague, friend Robin Blumenthal. Thank you for that. And with that, let me just say this. I always, whenever I speak in public or in private for that matter, and take questions and answers, there's always a question and answer period. I always begin with a preface by explaining the importance of questions in Judaism. Besides the fact that we all know we ask 4 questions at the Seder table and we educate our children from the youngest age to ask those questions, the whole process of studying Torah, and especially when you look in the Talmud, and we learned at length about the Talmud's methodology in Ayin Beis, is questions and answers. Someone makes a statement, immediately a student or a colleague says, well, I have a different opinion, or a contradiction from another verse, or from another thing I heard from a different teacher, and then begins a whole debate. Well, these different circumstances end up sometimes everyone agreeing, sometimes they disagree. And it's a process, it's a real dialogue and real arguments back and forth, obviously all with love and all with a positive, constructive objective to clarify the points. We call it libun hilsaset. Libun means like whitening, crystallizing, crystal clear. The way to crystallize an idea is by asking the questions, to see the nuances, to see if there are exceptions. Why is it in certain instances you say this, in certain instances you say differently? So questions is a built-in part and parcel of Judaism itself, of Torah itself, which of course sharpens the mind, as well as getting to the clarity that we can get. So questions are not seen as a necessary evil. Like, okay, since some people aren't so clear, we have to allow questions. On the contrary, it's actually a method of learning by presenting an idea, and then questions are asked and answers are given. Baal Shem Tov said that for every question is an answer, for every answer there's another question. So it's a journey, an actual journey. What you want to qualify is questions that come from an unhealthy place. Some people use questions like unhealthy skepticism just to justify their position. They'll just ask questions and questions and questions, and you can identify it. At least I for sure can. I have to have a lot of experience where people don't really want an answer. So that you have to figure out how to respond to that, or not to respond, or just not engage, because it's not about a question and answer. There's other issues going on. That's why the Mishnah says, "Da masha toshiv." You should know what to answer. In a pasuk in Mishlei, it says, "Altan la'ovel ba'avlose." Do not answer the fool, or do not answer the skeptic in his foolishness, because then you'll become part. So do you answer? Don't you answer? So that the Mishnah, interesting, doesn't say answer. It says damashatashiv. You always have to know what to answer. So you don't have to do all your due diligence and your work to find answers. Then the second level of wisdom is to know when to answer and how to answer and under which circumstances. Not always is a person ready for the answer. Sometimes a person is in a state. I think I've shared this story with Velvel Green, Professor Velvel Green, who lived in Minnesota. He was a professor, and he was a skeptic, and he was a person who grew up without any real Judaism. Rabbi Feller, the shliach there, would go visit him, and they would debate. And Rabbi Feller and Dr. Green, Professor Green, I should say, would ask him all kinds of questions about evolution, the age of the universe. How do you reconcile that? And how does the Torah look? He had his questions. So he gave him one of the letters of the Rebbe about evolution. And Professor Green said, this letter is very, for beginners, very basic, very for a novice, not for a professor. So he suggested to him, Rabbi Feller, to write a letter to the Rebbe and ask all your questions. He says, you said you read the letter and you have further questions, no problem. He did exactly that, but he never received an answer. We're talking now early 60s, the early 1960s. So a few years passed, I'm not sure how long, 2 years maybe. And meanwhile, in the process, he became more and more Shomer Torah mitzvahs to the point that he became completely. Actually, his son married my first cousin, so I know the family well. Bottom line is, 2 years later, approximately, he came to New York to visit the Rebbe for the first time. And they have a nice audience. He's a private audience with the Rebbe. At the end of the Rebbe turns to him and says, Professor Green, or whatever he called him, he said to him, the letter you wrote to me a few years ago, I'd like to respond to that letter now. And he began to respond, and the professor was very impressed. The sophisticated response. The Rebbe says, it's true, I did write the letter for the average person so everybody could understand it, but since you want to talk science on a higher level, let's discuss it. Then later, the Rebbe followed up with a follow-up letter, which we have. He actually sent it to me, which is a little more in depth, the topic. So when he finished, the Rebbe, Professor Green said to the Rebbe, when I asked you this question a few years ago, why didn't you answer me then? If you had such a good answer, why didn't you answer? Because bottom line is, I thought that you didn't have an answer. And that was my thinking. And I kept on thinking, okay, the Rebbe doesn't answer because he doesn't have an answer. Basically, I stumped you, so to speak. He didn't say those words. But I see you do have an answer, so why didn't you answer? So the Rebbe responded and said to him, because I sensed from your letter that had I answered, I may have won an argument, but I've lost a chassid. In other words, you win the battle, you lose the war. I went because the Rebbe sensed, obviously, that he was still in a place where he would not be able to just accept an answer. He would argue again, maybe due to arrogance, pride, whatever the academic credentials he had. And what you see from that is even wiser than the Rebbe's answer itself was the timing, knowing when a student is ready and when he's not ready. You have to make those choices, those decisions. Sometimes your answer maybe be understood, maybe it won't be understood, maybe there are other factors at work. Anyway, it's a very powerful story, in my opinion. And bottom line is, just to capture the intensity of that story, so the Rebbe told that of Fabrengen, actually. So Professor Green was once sitting with Rabbi Feller in his office, and they were talking some philosophical topics. And in the middle, it was getting late afternoon, so Rabbi Feller stood up and said, I apologize, I need to do something for around 15 minutes. He said, what do you need to do? He said, I need to pray mincha, the afternoon service. And Professor Green became so upset. He says, we're in the middle of having a conversation. And it's an important conversation. You're just getting up there to just pray to God? Isn't that like a little rude? And the bottom line is, of course, Rabbi Feller continued and prayed. And then afterwards, they spoke about it. So at that time, that's where Professor Green was. His ideas and his mind was more important than anything else, including God. So it could be the Rebbe sensed all of that. So the timing, everything is timing. Anyway, this was a short introduction, just a little about the power of questions. There's a lot more to say about it, but I just wanted to explain that questions play a critical role in the process of exploration and learning and growing and so on. At the same time, as I said, the question also means that a person is ready for an answer and not just wants to justify their particular position. They're really open for open discussions. So, a particular order, we can go by age or by beauty, or anyone wants to open up, please. The floor is yours. I'll try my best to answer the questions. This is what I do Sunday night, of course, when people write in questions, but here, you're getting a little special treat here because we do a study together, and I thought it's a good opportunity to do so, to open it up. And then, as I said, I have a few that came in writing, but I'll start first with those that are here. If anybody wants to begin, please.
I got one, if I can start.
Please, sure.
This week's Parsha, we read the story of the Akedah, and we're taught a precept that, if somebody is threatening you with death, unless you do something, you're allowed to do it unless there's three cases: adultery, idolatry, or murder. And essentially, God was asking Abraham to murder Yitzchak. That's what a sacrifice would have been. He was a live person, then he wouldn't have been alive. So couldn't Abraham have been within his legal right to say to Hashem, I love you, I want to do what you say, but according to your own laws, I'm not allowed to do it, so I can't do it. Yeah, how do you feel about something like that?
Okay, very fair question. I'll just amplify the question. This is one of the most popular, most common questions I receive every year during this parsha, for sure, and in general, this is one of the biggest questions about Akedah Yitzchak, where God commands Avram to bind Yitzchak and bring him as an offering to demonstrate his dedication to God. So your question is among many questions. I'll just add a few more. The concept of human sacrifice is completely unacceptable in Judaism. There was such a thing by certain different idolatrous tribes and so on, but not in Judaism. So how does that work? And in general, even if it wasn't this issue of, like you said, murder, what kind of request is that? Abraham waited all his life. He finally has a son with Sarah. And the Torah emphasizes, as bincha, sichitcha, asher ahavta, your only son, meaning your only son with Sarah, the one you love. And suddenly God is telling him or bring him as an offering. It doesn't seem make any sense. And why doesn't Abraham challenge God at least? Explain why he just follows orders without any question, which makes the question even stronger, because just a few verses earlier in this week's chapter, you see when God tells Abraham that the wicked city of Sodom will be destroyed. So you would think Abraham would say, okay, finally they're getting what they deserve. We always wait to see that the wicked shouldn't prosper and the righteous should prosper. And here they're finally getting what they deserve. They were a cruel, cruel city, sadists who literally were punishing and hurting people. Instead, what does Abraham do? He begins to pray for them. Maybe they're 50 tzaddikim, and he goes through a whole argument with God. How could you do such a thing? Hashefet kol haaretz lo ya'aseh mishpat, the judge of the universe. People will say he's not doing justice. And when it comes to his own son, to sacrifice him, or as you call it, to murder him, no protest at all. Literally within just a chapter in this same chapter. So you see there's something going on here that is very odd. Comes to Sodom, Abraham protests. Ultimately, obviously, they couldn't find a tzaddik. But Abraham did protest. And when it comes to Yitzchak, nothing. He's ready to go. Vayashkim Avram Baboker, he wakes up early in the morning, which makes it this is one of the big rewards that he got, that he didn't procrastinate. He didn't say later in the day. He did it right away. And many other such questions. Furthermore, we read it every year, Rosh Hashanah, we read this chapter in the Torah, in the second day of Rosh Hashanah. Every day in davening, in the Birchas HaShachar, before Heidu, we read the whole chapter as well. So it's not just, it happened, we're proud of it. We're constantly reminding God of this Akedah. So you see, it becomes a central part of Judaism. Everyday, daily prayers, Rosh Hashanah, which is when it happened according to some opinions, or all opinions. So clearly there's something going on here that's more than meets the eye. And again, I reiterate what I said earlier. When you read Torah, you have to think of context. We see anywhere else that God ever asks anyone to do something like that? Did the Jews ever even suggest something? Maybe, as an atonement, let's bring a human being as an offering. You don't find such a consideration. It's not even allowed, etc., etc. So it begs question, and I will give you the best answer I have. There are probably a lot of answers because all the commentaries talk about it. Now, of course, the end of the story indicates on the beginning of the story what happens at the end. He doesn't end up doing it. So in other words, there was clearly a test because God tells him not to do it. And instead they bring the bull, the ayil, that replaces Yitzchak. And so you see from that God never intended him to actually do it. But still, what's the consideration even? And Abraham didn't know that he wouldn't end up doing it. He was ready to do it. Yitzchak was 37 years old, mind you, as well. He wasn't a baby. And he went along without any question either. Why didn't he challenge it? He could have said, why are you tying me up here? On an altar and so on. So the question is listed. Let me tell you the brief answers. I would explain it. And it also shows you from the answer how you're supposed to read Torah in a much broader context. Whenever you take any verse in the Torah on its own, even a verse in a book, lahavdil, you never look at one chapter. You look at the whole book. Because one chapter can be taken out of context. So there are verses in the Torah that are horrible if you read them on their own. The curses, what will happen to you, the consequences if you transgress. The Torah is very blunt. But the only way to understand it is by understanding context. First context is Torah is a Torah's chesed. Everything in the Torah is about love. It's a Torah shalom. To bring peace to the world. That's a given, that God gave us a blueprint. A good God created a universe with a purpose. And that purpose is to create a partnership between God and the human race to turn this world into a home for the divine. And that's a beautiful home, a home of peace, of love, of harmony, of everything we're promised. Everything will come when Mashiach comes. No more war, no more hunger, no more jealousy, no more crime, no more violence. So all that we know about this world, the corruption of it, the hostility, the self-serving interests, the battles, the wars, the violence, and so on, all of that is the world that the Torah is coming actually to repair, to create a world that doesn't have any of that. That's a given. That's an axiom. So before you enter any chapter in the Torah, any verse, this is a must. If then you see that the Torah says something that doesn't sound peaceful, that doesn't sound harmonious, does not sound loving or kind, chesed, the answer has to be is either we don't understand what the Torah is saying, or meaning the Torah is chesed and we don't understand it, or either we don't understand what the Torah is saying, or we're applying it the wrong way. In other words, it's a question about the topic, not about the Torah. So with that in mind, let's now take the story of Avram. As I discussed last week at length, Avram went on a journey to find God. He searched exhaustively. He looked at the material world and through a process of elimination came to realize it can't be this physical world. Can't be the sun and the stars and the sun and the stars and the moon and so on. It's something that's a completely different reality that put everything in place for a purpose. To the point that he realized that he has to put his ego and his sense of self aside to be able to experience this higher reality we call the divine, God. And this is a long journey that took Abraham many years, till finally Lech Lecha, that we learned about last week's chapter. He goes on a journey to find himself, and the relationship with God begins, as discussed at length. Then it says that God tested Abraham with 10 tests. The Pirkei Avos, he lists all the 10 different tests. There are different opinions what they are exactly. 10 tests. Lech Lecha was one of them, actually. The bris was another one. The final test was the Akedah. So the Akedah is the last of 10 tests. Now, the word for test in Hebrew is nisayon. Nisayon. That's a test, like a litmus test. It's not meant it's not meant that anyone perform anything. It's meant to prove something. Are you capable of really having a relationship with me? You want to have a relationship with me? Let's prove it. And it's not about God needing proof like in a court of law. It's that, like the commentaries explain, the Klei Yakar and others, it's that Abraham should recognize what it means to have a true relationship. There's a price to pay when you have a relationship with God. And it's not just about you. So all those tests are all about Nisayon, like from the word nes, like a miracle also comes from nes. Nes is a flag in Hebrew as well. Arim nisi ala harim, meaning it represents elevating and lifting up to a higher level. So the Nisayon, Chassidus explains at length that these tests, not really tests, they're actually a way of challenging. It's like when you see a person joining, let's say, I'll just use a very simple example. The World Series just ended last night. Sports. A guy doesn't just join a team. He has to prove himself. So there's all kinds of challenges to prove himself till he be able to show that he can deliver, that he can really perform. So Nisayon is really a way of training someone to higher levels and expectations to see what they're capable of. That is how we have to see the story of the Akedah. So now let's take it to the Akedah. I'm not going to go through the other 9 tests. That's discussed. I've actually written articles about it. There's in other places. The final one is his son Yitzchak. Now, every father naturally loves their son. That's what a healthy father is about. Obviously, unhealthy parents, they may love their children, but they don't know how to love. And they can hurt their children with all the distortions that they may think they're loving their children, but it's really love on their terms. Avram Avinu was a father who loved his son, as did Sarah, his mother, Yitzchak's mother. Now, a biological love of a son is beautiful, right? But God wanted a deeper relationship with Avram than just a biological one. He didn't just want a natural one. He wanted to have a divine relationship. So how do you actually prevent a parent from hurting a child? We have today plenty of abuse, overt abuse, covert abuse, all types of levels. So there's a story with even though he talks about it publicly, I'm not going to mention his name here. He's a Chabad rabbi, who had, unfortunately, a streak of rage, and he would hit his children. He hit his children physically. And he regretted it. He could not control himself. So he wrote to the Rebbe a letter saying, I have this, I sometimes get an uncontrollable fit of rage, and I physically hit my children. And I want the Rebbe to give me some advice what to do. And the Rebbe wrote back to him, I don't know the exact language, he repeats it when he talks about it openly. He said, the Rebbe said to him, it's not your children. It's God's children. If someone gave you a gift, would you go ahead and start tearing that gift up or hitting? If someone gave you a child to watch, would you start hitting that child? It's not your child. You don't own your children. It's God's children. He still had challenges, but that changed the whole picture. What does that mean? It means that even in the things that we think were so special, a parent and a child, God was saying to Avram Avinu, why do you love your child? Because you love him? And what happens if you love him and you think something is right for him, but it's not necessarily correct for him? Many parents feel that their children should become doctors and lawyers, or they should do other things, or they want those children to give them nachas and pride so they can brag about their children. You see what happened to my child. But all the while, the child's real nature is being ignored. I can't tell you how many people I've met and said, I do what I do because my parents insisted that I do it. From young age, this was the expectation. It's not who I am. And you could hurt someone in the name of love with all the good intentions. So God was introducing the concept of bittul even in the most natural and biological of all things, a natural love of a father to a son. So he was saying to Avram Avinu, are you ready for my behalf? It wasn't for atonement. It wasn't for any type of sacrifice. If on my behalf, are you ready to give your son to me? If you look at the expression, akeda means to bind. It doesn't say to kill. It says to bind him. Binding is his kashrus, his connection. It's like a bris. Are you ready to commit? Avram Avinu had already familiarity with God. This wasn't the first time God spoke with him. This is the 10th test. So Avram Avinu had total trust. He knew it was God speaking. Because if it wasn't that case, he would say immediately, who are you to tell me to offer my son? But Avram Avinu had built a very profound, loving relationship with God and knew there's no way that God is asking me to kill my son. I don't know what he wants. Doesn't make sense to me. But I know I'm totally committed. And yes, I'm ready to even bring my love of my son to God. And that's the story here. That's all that God wanted to prove, that to infuse the human love with a divine love. And the end of the story is, of course, that now, how you can imagine how Avram loved Yitzchak even more after the end of the story. Because it wasn't just his mortal, finite love, it was now infused with a divine element, because he did it, not just because God gave me a child and I love my child, but because I now have a divine element, because I was ready that this child is going to be dedicated to God. Like we read about Chana the first day of Rosh Hashanah. She said, Shmuel, who was born, is yours, is God's. It's not my child, it's your child. That was the point, to turn a human child and a human father into a divine child and a divine love from a father to a son. And that's why we say it every day. And on Rosh Hashanah, we invoke it. Not just because Avram was ready to sacrifice as it's stated. That's not at all the intention. It's because Avram understood that if God says so, God gave me this child, there's no way that God is taking away the child in any way. He didn't understand how it would happen, but that's exactly what happened. So the Akedah is a very profound story that tests someone in the deepest way. Not everybody perhaps could pass such a test, because it is a very deep one, but nevertheless, that is, in brief, the story. And today, had this never happened, would we even have any memories of Avram and Yitzchak? Because of that, it created, like I said, infused the Avram-Yitzchak relationship with something that's eternal, that we read about today, because it was tested, it was proven. It wasn't just the natural love that a father has to a son. It became an immortal one. And we speak about it till this very day. Now that means that we can love someone, and then that love becomes a much more sacred love. Just like when you see marriage, there are three partners. It's not just husband and wife. There's also God as a partner. And that infuses that love and relationship with something that is divine and eternal. That's a brief answer, relatively speaking, to this big question. Okay?
May I add something that I heard from Rabbi Yitzchak Ginsburg about
You're
this?
adding to explain it, or you have a question on what I said?
No, I'm not adding to explain. I'm adding to add to what you're saying. That the Abraham went against his nature, because it says Avram is chesed and love, and it says Ata yadati ki yirei Elokim. That was also part of the request, is to see if Avram could go against his nature.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Okay, let's move on. Next question, anybody?
Okay. I have a question, and not regarding the parsha, but and I know this was like we discussed this many times.
It doesn't have to be the parsha. This is open for anything. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So you know the whole concept of what we talked about, the whole sweetening video. That first there's one level that basically you get overwhelm the bitterness with sweet, and that's how the bitter becomes sweet. And then there's another one that the bitterness, the sweetness kind of convinces the other side that this is what you want, all that. And then there's one that's transformative, meaning that the bitterness itself transforms, into sweetness. Can you give us like a practical daily, like something that we see in our daily lives that would describe each one of these levels?
When we learned it in Ayin Beis, I gave quite a few practical examples. You don't remember them, I see, right?
But it's someone remember. I remember some of the stuff you said as far as
Okay,
like
no, it's fine. It's all right. It's
But
all
I
right.
just
But I
wanted to
did
know
when
as a collective, like okay, this is let's take one
I'm saying when
example. Sorry.
I'm saying to you that I did to explain all these three in practical terms when we learned it
Yes.
in Ayin Beis.
Yes.
That's all I'm saying.
Yes.
I could sum up what I said then briefly, and you have many examples for these type of things. For example, when a person has, let's say, a temptation or desire to do something that's inappropriate, so the first and most practical way to deal with it is simply self-control. You exert more power to refrain and restrain yourself, and thus you are avoiding doing whatever that temptation was. That's level one. That would be the equivalent of taking bitter water, which is like the negative, and adding so much sweet water that the sweet overwhelms and overrides and outnumbers the bitter. In other words, your commitment to something positive controls the negative impulses you may have. Call this kafir, basically. Restraint, refrain. The second level is more than that, is that you actually convince the animal soul that it's good for you not to necessarily give in to your desires and pleasures. And like you explained, the divine soul explains to the animal soul, hey, like we learned as well, for short-term instant gratification may be enjoyable, but even for your interest, it's also not. So there, it's not just restraining and controlling the animal soul, you're actually persuading it. You make it feel that it really appreciates what the divine soul wants you to do. So that's like level two, where you actually, the bitter is becoming sweet, but it's who's doing it, it's the sweet water that's making the bitter sweet. The third, which is total ishapcha, transformation, is when the animal soul on its own, let's say through hitting rock bottom, it reaches a place of such desperation and such distress that the animal soul realizes this is not fitting for me. Something's just, it's not the divine soul convincing it. It's the negative itself has hit a point where it comes to realize that there's something really wrong. And that becomes the motivation. So it's the bitter itself that becomes the motivator and that initiates the transformation. Now that, of course, is the most complete version, because then, even level two, you've convinced the animal soul, but it doesn't mean that it's permanent. The animal soul can still have, from time to time, it's like the example in Tanya, he talks about two kings in chapter 9. Two kings battling over control of the city. Small city, which is the body, the Eitzotevia, the Nefesh Elikis, Nefesh Habamis. But two kings. So you could have one king wins, and the second king is subdued, and that's it. So he surrenders. But he didn't really surrender. He's still an enemy. He just cannot pick up his head and his voice. So there's still enemy forces in the city, but they've been subdued. Second step is no, they see it's in their interest also to cooperate, but you haven't really transformed them. It's in their interest, so you can trust them to a certain extent. But you never know when one day they decide, you know what, we're strong enough to now challenge the king. The third level is when they actually transform and realize that it's in their interest on their own. Not because they've been persuaded, not because they've compromising because they get something else in return, but they've actually come to realize that this is not to become and become a support to the divine soul in the example of the two kings. So there are many, many examples for this in negotiations, in business, in relationships. You know, you could have people have a ceasefire. So that's level one. Second, you could have more than that. You could have some form of collaboration. But the ultimate is total peace. when this material world itself will become a dira b'tachtenim, not just go along with the spiritual journey, but the material itself, like we learned, the body itself will nourish the soul because it recognizes and comes aware of the helam ha'atzmi, of the etzem, which is the ultimate dira b'tachtenim, that the tachtenim themselves, the physical world itself, will express a divine dimension that the higher worlds and the spiritual worlds could not. In other words, that the bitter will express something that the sweet waters could never do, even when their sweet waters are overwhelming or persuading the bitter waters to become more sweet. That's briefly, that can be applied, as I said, in many, many scenarios of levels of affecting and transforming something.
Thank you so
Maybe this
much.
jogs some people's memory because if you remember, we spoke about this pretty much outlined. I have no problem reviewing and repeating it. That's not what I'm not complaining. I'm just saying I'm referring back to what I taught then because we learned it for pages upon pages, and there's a lot of material there in the middle of volume 3 of Ayin Beis. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Sure. My pleasure.
I have a question if it's okay.
Of course.
So
you're not exempt from this session.
I haven't exhausted all of my opportunities, thank God. I have not been able to resist myself in getting ahead a little bit in Hemshech Vav and started learning it a little bit on my own. And I heard something, and I'm also learning with recordings from another master of Chassidus. I'm not going to give the person's name. I don't think you're going to disagree, but I don't want to say it in case. But it's a very, very, very valid source, and I'm pretty sure you know this person. Anyways, he was explaining the notion of dir batachtonim, making this world a dwelling place for God or godliness. And he explains that each Rebbe of the 7 Rebbeim of Chassidic Chabad have a slightly different shita, and that the concept has evolved, not necessarily be in any way, God forbid, become contradictory, but evolved. And he explains that in Samach Vav, he said, the Rebbe Rashab says, and this is a turn of the 20th century, Tachlis hakavana beyiras hasham b'gruf hu b'chdei lahamshich gilui orein sof ba'alamos al yidei Torah mitzvos. And this is the inyan of yichud orein sof hasod v'kolamin b'mamali kolamin. To translate briefly for those who don't understand Hebrew, the purpose and intention of the descension of the soul into the body is in order to draw down the revelation of the infinite light into the lower worlds through the performance of Torah mitzvahs. And this is a matter of the unification of the infinite Orient Sof, infinite divine light, of the Sovev, the transcendent divine light, with the immanent divine light. Okay. That's in Samach Vav. It's page Gimel. Then he says the Rebbe, the most previous, the Rebbe, the 7th Rebbe, his emphasis on Der B'Tachtonim was not the drawing down of ore into the lower worlds, but rather the transformation and of recognizing that the darkness itself is godliness. And he says in a certain Sicha, Sefer Sichos, in Tuf Shin Nun Aleph, he lo lahachnis elikus b'tof hachoshech ela legalos she'achoshech atzmo hu elikus. That
what's your question to me?
Well, there's a seeming contradiction. The Rebbe Rashab says that the purpose, the ultimate purpose of the neshama is to draw down light into the darkness, and the Rebbe is saying no. The ultimate purpose is to reveal the darkness. Is to reveal godliness within the light itself. To reveal the darkness itself is godliness.
But you said earlier that that's an evolution. That's not contradictory. You're saying there is a contradiction.
Well, it's seeming to see the Rebbe. Yeah.
So my response is threefold. These questions should be posed to the person who taught it, because who says I agree with him with that premise. That's number one.
But that's why I'm asking you.
No, so so let me finish the 3 points. The question should be posed to the person who taught it, because I can't speak for him. I don't know what he meant. I'm not sure the context. I don't know all the details. So I think you should reach out to him since you're learning. Why don't you ask him directly? That would be the first thing. Secondly, since we didn't start learning Samach Vav, I'm not going to jump ahead. When we learn it, we'll get there, and I'll explain it the way I understand it, and let's see if there's any contradiction. Thirdly, if you learned Ayin Beis, your question should be even deeper than that. The Rebbe Rashab at length talks about how the Cheshech Ein Oid.
I didn't get to that. Right, you're right. Good.
Let me finish. Let me finish.
Yeah.
But the Rebbe Rashab himself talks about the transformation, and he says it in context of several levels. There's Havayu Elikim, B'Shamayim Emal V'Oretz Mitachas, and then Einoi, that the dark, like I just mentioned about the bitter waters, that the darkness itself will be. This is the Rebbe Rashab himself. So who says there's a chiddush from the Rebbe? Maybe it's the Rebbe Rashab himself who speaks about these different levels, and maybe I don't know if there's anything the Rebbe adds to that. There may be details he may add. So those are my 3 points that I would say in response to your question.
Okay, so that was my follow-up question, which was that.
But you heard what I said, all 3 points?
I heard every single one of them,
First thing, ask him. Secondly, when we learn Samach Vav, we'll talk about it.
I'm getting ahead of myself, yeah.
No, you're allowed to look ahead, but I'm just telling you my response. And thirdly, the Rebbe Rashab himself talks about these things. So I'm not sure why you have to go the same Rebbe Rashab who wrote Samach Vav, and frankly, in Samach Vav itself, he talks about the Helam Ha'atzmi as well, just for the record.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, that's why I was confused, because we talked at the end of Ayin Beis.
That's why you have to go to the teacher that confused you. I can't speak for him. Mm-hmm. That's why I said point number 1, you should represent it to him and see what he says.
Okay, maybe I'll go back to him with the end of Ayin Beis and say, hey, what doesn't the Rebbe Rashab himself talk about the transformation of the darkness?
Yeah. All the questions you asked, fair questions.
Okay, so you don't think it's rude for me to go to that teacher and ask that question?
Is it rude? Well, you're asking me the question. Why wouldn't you ask him the question?
Well, because I'm not contradicting you. I'm coming to question him.
I don't know. You could say it respectfully. You heard what he said, and you have a few questions. Nothing.
Okay.
We just spoke about questions is a very fair, legitimate thing. You're not going to argue with him. You want to hear him to let him pose the questions, and let's see what he says.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay. Are there any other questions that anybody wants to present? Not. Let me read. I'll read 2 questions that I think came in. Let me see here. One. Let me see which one I'll do first. 1 second. Let me do this one. Someone wrote on our group, actually, on our WhatsApp group. In the example of the vessel and the water, one of the ways how the two could influence each other, if the container has any residue or grease, it can affect the water. I believe altering its taste might be a way of judging the influence of the grease if water intended to drink. The difference in perception depends on each person's sensitivity to taste. What can serve as a true measuring rod for one to recognize and overcome their own blind spots, or to avoid judging others' help or advice wrongly, for example? I'm not sure if these are 2 separate questions or the same question. The first one, I don't really understand what the question is. Altering the taste might be a way of judging. Okay. Sounds like it's one flow. Look, when it comes to Eris and Kalim, basically, as I've explained many times, they are basically a model for balance. Everything in life has an and a Keli. You write something on a piece of paper, or you write a book or an article, the letters on the page is the Keli, and the words is the content that's expressed through those letters and words is the I'm speaking right now. The words I use is the Kalim. The message and the spirit of the message is the Now, when a person is really good at what they do, the and Keli are very much aligned with each other. Not too many words, not too few words. That's what a good writer is. You read them, it flows, it's fluid. Very, very smooth. Just like when you put wine in a proper cup, very fluid. If the cup is in some way damaged, it has a leak, or it's filled with, like you said, grease or other materials, it'll, of course, soil the wine or the water or the liquid and spoil it, if it's enough grease. That means the Ur and Keli are not aligned with each other. In Atzilus, Uris and Kelim are perfectly aligned. Ur of Chachma and the Ur Ari. Let's take a human body. Most children, newborns, are born with 20/20 vision. I'm not talking about, God forbid, there's some problem. What's 20/20 vision? Means that they see perfectly clear as best as a human being can see. So the Keli, the vessel of the eye, and the energy of vision are aligned with each other. You see newborn children, look how their chests heave when they breathe. They're using all of their lungs as they breathe. As we get older, our, let's call it our equipment, our appliances, meaning our body, begins to wear down. So it's no longer 20/20 vision necessarily, or you're not using you're using only 80 or 90% of your lungs, or other things, toxins, blockages, God forbid. Other things begin to become a part of your body, and it can impede the flow, the circulation, the nervous system. God forbid, a stroke is a clot that blocks the flow of blood. That means the Ur and Keli are not aligned with each other. What you want to do is clean it out and make sure it's as smooth as possible. How well we can do that depends already on your health. So wherever you look in life, you look at a company, for example. If it's running fluidly, smoothly, it means the mission of the company and what it wants to achieve is aligned with its tools, with its methods. Because you always need both. You need the instruments have to be aligned with what those instruments are serving. So Eris and Kalim is essentially a balanced thing. As I said, in Atzilus, everything is pure and seamless. In the lower world, they begin to become more dissonant and more disconnected. In Toyu, for example, is the model of chaos, where Eris and Kalim are not balanced. Too much and too little Kali. That's like when you see a person speak and they have very few words, but they're just overwhelming you with ideas and you can't follow what they're saying. It's completely confusing. There's a lot of and little Kalim. You could have the opposite. You could have a lot of Kalim and little Person speaks so much, you don't know what they're really saying. In Ayin Beis, in volume 1, at the end of volume 1, our volume 1, the earlier edition, there's 4 different imbalances he talks about in Toyu, where the Eiris are very powerful and the Kalim are very minimal. The Kalim are very powerful and the Eiris are very minimal, or both are very powerful or both are very minimal. And each of them is another dysfunctional state. What you want is the perfect balance of energy and container. Take electricity. You have a light bulb or an appliance. What happens when there's an electrical surge? It can blow the appliance because the air overwhelmed the Keli. The opposite is also possible. There's so little electricity running, the Keli is not, the instrument, the appliance is not turning on, or it doesn't have enough juice, so to speak. So wherever you turn, even the transistors, or today microchips that are used in smartphones, they're used in AI and so on, they're all about a balance of a flow between energy and matter. And that energy and matter is the key to all success in life on every possible level. So that answers, I believe, the first part of the question. As far as your second part of the question, what can serve as a true measuring rod for one to recognize? Well, blind spots are such that one guy once told me, yes, I have blind spots, but I know where they are. That's not a true blind spot. A blind spot means you don't know where they are. So the ultimate antidote to subjectivity and blind spots, we discussed last week in Lech Lecha, is getting advice from an objective party. Aseh lecha rav. You have a mentor, knei lecha chaver, a friend, a colleague. Why do we go to lawyers, accountants, advisors, and so on? Because I'm not just talking about to represent us, but also to get an objective opinion from an expert who's not biased. Tell me your opinion about a situation. Is this a good investment? Is this the right way to buy a house? etc., etc. It's all because either we are ignorant or we have blind spots, or we're subjective, and we want to have a healthy, objective advice. Anything in life is always possible and prone to becoming distorted when you have personal bias or prejudice or subjectivity. That's why Lech Lecha, we spoke about, is going beyond, leaving the subjectivity behind. But the best, easiest way is to have someone you can consult and say, here's what I think, what do you think? And be open to hear that they may challenge you, or you may not hear what you like. And you have to be ready, if you really want to be honest and succeed, is to listen to that other opinion. So in a way, Eris and Caleb are the same thing. Bias blinds us and doesn't allow the Eris and the Keli to work smoothly, whereas objectivity allows it to reclaim or regain its balance and harmony. Okay, that is that question. And one more I'll deal with, unless somebody else on the call here wants to ask something. I'll get back to you in a minute. This is from another member of our class. I don't know if she's here on the class right now, but anyway. This is the question. Is there a ruchni izdika, a spiritual root for the huge growth of gender deviations in our time, especially in Israel? Does a strong liberal agenda to destroy Torah values and family foundation have any spiritual connotations? How far does Zuma is the Aramaic word for poison, for toxins, pollution of the snake, meaning in the Garden of Eden, how far can it penetrate our world and Jewish people? How can Chassidus help prevent the spread of this deficiency and find the right education tools and remedy against this problem? Okay, good. Oh, I think the one who asked the question is here. If you want to say who you are, you can. I don't know if you wanted it to be confidential or anonymous. It's up to you. Okay.
No, I didn't mean to be confidential. I just tried to be more simple for you to find the question.
Okay, appreciate it. So let me answer. It's a very good question. As a matter of fact, I was thinking about it this Shabbos because I saw an article in the Wall Street Journal that talks about a split taking place between LGBTQ, between the LGBT people and the TQ plus people. And I found it to be quite, it's quite tragic and sad on one hand, but also quite amusing on the other hand. Because you could see once you start deviating, that it really has no end. I don't want to go into the whole details, but I will say this. There's a whole debate going on by them, these groups, where the gay community says, hey, we're attracted to the same gender and that's that. And the other groups, one says, no, if you're attracted to the same gender, it means that you're not the same gender. It means you're probably effeminate and more of a woman within, or a male within. And then finally another group that just says it wavers from back and forth. The bottom line is, once you start tampering with the boundaries of male and female, there's no real end to it. I have a lot of compassion for anyone dealing with struggles around this. So I don't want this to appear in any way insensitive. And I unfortunately deal with it myself. I don't mean me, but with people. I meet people all the time. So I'm quite aware of the issues, and they're a lot deeper than just the way they're presented. Because who made this decision that some people are simply male or some are female and some maybe can be either, or it can be changed and so on? Well, I, again, don't want to come to criticize any individual here, but the fact of the matter is life is made up of structures. Like water and land have a boundary between them. If water decided to become land and land decided to become water, we would have the extinction of the human race. Call it tsunami. But tsunamis last only for a few minutes. Imagine the constant that the water decided, I'm going to cross the boundary and now no longer respect the land, the line of the sand that God created between water and land. Same thing with the the windpipe and the food pipe. They have served different functions. So from the Torah point of view, genders is built into the creation. That there's male, there's female. The truth is they were one in the beginning, because God is one. God is neither male nor female. He says, let's create the human being in the divine image. And he created male and female. That means, the way Chassidus explains it, that male and female are two dimensions of the divine. And when they join together, they reunite the divine image in which they were created. But there are two different elements here. Now, a few things, you know that is the basis of love and intimacy and sexuality, the attraction of the two genders, because they both want to become one with the divine image in which they were created. But we take away a few things from this. That first of all, they originated from one. So it's not a surprise that there's overlap. It's not a surprise that there's in every masculine energy, there's feminine energy. And in every feminine energy, there's masculine energy. The difference, however, is, yes, in land, there's also water. You find moisture in land too. However, it's primarily land, but it also has elements of it. So the boundaries are maintained even though there's overlap. I find the biggest problem that exists today is that there's a confusion, lack of education, lack of moral clarity, lack of understanding what God wants of this world. So then people are just making their own choices, what is and what isn't a male or female. Once you open it up to that, it's up to elections, up to people who may not even have healthy attitudes, and who knows what they went through in their lives. I wouldn't trust anyone. I wouldn't trust myself. You don't trust people for this. That's why we have a God. God is the one that decided where land is and what water is. God decided the difference between mineral, vegetable, animal, and man, between the sun and the moon, between heaven and earth. All the distinctions in this world are not man-made. They were made by God. Now, if you don't believe in God, you're going to have a problem, because you'll say, you know what, we can do anything. Science, maybe we can turn a stone into a frog. Maybe, if you manipulate it. I don't know if you could or not. But just for argument's sake, that's not in our domain. We come into an existing world with structure. Our mission is to take the structure and turn it into a divine home. That's the mission we have, not to tamper. As a matter of fact, one of the reasons there's the Isra of Klaim. In Torah, there's a prohibition not to mix certain, for example, wool and linen, shatnez, or certain animals should not be crossbred. So it's both in the animal kingdom, in the vegetable kingdom, and also in others. You have the idea of Klaim, of grafting things. Certain things you're allowed to graft, and certain things you're not allowed to. So all the commentaries there, Rabbeinu Bachai, beautiful. They talk about how don't tamper with the boundaries that God created, because boundaries define who we are. As I said, imagine the windpipe and the food pipe decided to become one. We would choke, God forbid. We wouldn't be able to live. Life is defined by structures. Structures have boundaries. Now, boundaries are not meant to separate. Boundaries are meant to unite. When the windpipe is in its place and the food pipe is in its place, then they work together well. That's the whole point. It's harmony within diversity. So, unfortunately, today there is, I can't say in every circle, the fact that there is an existing meltdown or ambiguity or the blurring of the lines, the spiritual source for that is a confusion of what God wants of us in life. And that has permeated now our education systems, our homes, media, and children are being fed all kinds of things. A second thing, people are being hurt sexually and other ways that are distorting their sexual identities. Now, when you say that, that's like sacrilegious. You can't say that. I was born a certain way. Why are you telling me it's due to abuse or due to molestation? But they don't want to talk and trace how much it's connected to that often. Now, it may not be directly abuse, but yes, when your parents have confusion in their own identity, male or female identity, you don't think children are going to pick that up? But this you're not allowed to talk about, because you want to give people the right to choose to be male or female or same gender attraction, etc. Again, I'm not looking to criticize anyone that's in that place, because I feel compassion for them. But if you're asking me, I think it goes back to what I spoke earlier, the balance between Eris and Kalim, energy and containers. The same thing, the balance between Chachma and Bina, between Chesed and Gvura, between male and female. There's the understanding the balance and understanding the diversity is critical to be able to create harmony. You cannot create harmony if you create a confusion of the structure. All of engineering is based on this. All programming is based. When someone programs, there are millions of lines of code. You add one period or take out a period, or you confuse the program and code, the whole program won't work. So it's all based on structural integrity, and the same applies to the human race, including gender. The biggest problem is sexuality distorts everybody. Sexual pleasure, let's be blunt about it, and all its energy creates distortions. We're not talking engineering, everybody can understand. If the machine isn't working, fix and make sure that the wires didn't cross. But in human beings, because there's the sexual part, which of course connects also to what people call love and companionship and intimacy and pleasure and everything that comes with it, and throw a little Freudian stuff into it, you can imagine how people get distorted. So all of it to me is a reflection of a lack of a blueprint where we align ourselves with the way God wanted the structure of existence to be. That's my answer to the initial question. As far as how deep this goes, keep in mind that Judaism does not believe in original sin. So it did not take control. Satan does not control the world. Even when there are distortions, the essence of it all is intact. Like we say in the morning, my soul that you've given me is pure. However, the pure soul can end up being enclosed and manifest in dirty garments. That's what we have. The pollution of the Chet Tzadas, the toxins that were introduced into existence, like I said before with the child whose lungs are perfect, but then the toxins begin to impede the ability for the flow to be perfect, is something that was superimposed. And the way to remedy it, yes, is to correct it through the tikkun of this confusion, is through Torah and mitzvahs and aligning ourselves with the blueprint, the way God wants us to live. And that's where Chassidus comes in. Chassidus is an essential component in realigning the universe to be aligned with the way God intended it to be in every possible way, whether it's in gender elements or other things. Remember, the crossing of boundaries in so many areas. Everything, you have to understand its role. Money is an important piece, but money is a means to something. It's a means to build a mishkan, to build a temple. You don't make it an end in itself. And the same with every aspect of life. It's about putting it in its place. Everything should be clear where it is and what it's not, and how they all work together in one beautiful harmony. Look at an orchestra, a beautiful orchestra playing many instruments. You could have a 100-piece orchestra. And look at the symphony that comes out of it. The conductor is making sure everything is aligned. You know, someone does something a little different, it affects the whole orchestra, the whole symphony. So it's about harmony within diversity. The same thing with words in a book. A coherent book is going to be very structured, but very much aligned with each other. It's essentially the story of life, of creating the harmony within all the diversity, respecting the diversity and its boundaries, while also then creating a unity and a harmony. Unfortunately, we live in a generation that the method to do this has been very much convoluted or lost to most of us, including in the Jewish world. And that's the work. That's why we learn Chassidus, and that's why we're doing what we do. That's why I do what I do, is to help realign this misalignment out there. That's a brief summary of that. Okay.
Is any kind of immediate remedy for right now from Hasidim that we can apply? I know you give us all tools, but it's a chess tool that not everyone wants to open. How about those who...
Immediate, you mean like a Band-Aid, like a quick fix?
No. I mean, for those who are far from being religious,
I don't think religion is the solution. I told you there are many people who are religious and are just as misaligned as everybody else. I don't know if religion is the right word. To me, it's about being godly and healthy. All of us can use an infusion of Chassidus and Torah to align and look at our lives and become healthier people. I don't know if there's a quick anything in this regard. This is about work. This is about work. There are short-term solutions, longer-term solutions. But if you want to begin properly, if you're a parent, you begin early. You begin by teaching your children a healthy attitude to life. That's not just based on your own prejudices and biases, but based on what it says in the Torah and the guidelines that come with it. For those of us that are not necessarily in the case of bearing children, meaning our children are grown up or we don't have children, whatever, it's the same thing with yourself. You want to become a healthier person, you have to ask the right questions, ask the right people, study the right material that says, okay, how do I become a healthier person? How's my chesed going to be healthier? How's my gvura going to be healthier? How's my teferah going to be healthier? This is everything we do. This is all the whole chassidus that we learn, and especially when we apply it, is all about that. Is how to align. We have an animal soul and a divine soul. There's a whole Tanya written, how to deal with the struggles and battles between the materialism of life and the spirituality of life, the transcendent and the survival part, self-interest and higher purpose. This is everything. So to me, it's both a short and long. Short term is beginning somewhere. You don't wait till you know it all. You begin with a decision that I want to have behavioral and then ultimately emotional and cognitive reconditioning and growth and maturity. That's essentially the story of life. Yeah.
Rabbi, I have a question about balance, and as a Baal Tshuva, it is a struggle sometimes. It's getting, I think, a little bit easier, but to know how far I'm going, is it selfish? Is it like, it's a balance that I have with my family. We were not, they weren't raised with Hasidus. And they're adults now, my children. So how do you, I just wonder about navigating that. Like, what does Hasidus say? Should you go slower? Should you make sure? I mean, it's not a great question, but it's a little confusing for me.
It's an excellent question. It's a question I've addressed at least in my programs, I would say 10, 15 times at least that I can remember. My life, I speak about it a lot. It's a question that many, many people ask. It's an excellent question. And the answer ultimately is case by case. There's no one size fits all. Every person is different. Who that person is, what their family, where they're at, the health of the family, their ability to communicate. It's like anything in life. I would strongly advise to speak to someone you trust, a mentor, that you can review all these questions you're asking with specific detail, because it's all in the details. It's no general rule. There's no way to say you go 10 miles an hour, you go 20. It all comes down to case by case, and not everything has to be necessarily done immediately. It's about integrating into your life a healthy approach. And if a person did not live that way till then, you have to do it piecemeal. You have to do it in stages. The cold turkey usually doesn't work well because it has to be integrated in a way that the family and the family unit and all the people around you can also live with it and deal with it, whether it's children, spouse, friends. There are many people who become more and more observant. They often alienate the people they knew because either they don't understand, they see, some people think you went over the wall, or they don't see the value of it. So there's also a matter of sensitivity and the importance of sharing it with your friends and trying to explain to them. Not trying to convert anyone, we're not trying to proselytize, but this is what you're saying is an issue that everybody I know deals with, so many people, hundreds. I mean, again, I've dealt with this so frequently. And frankly, the same is true even of someone who grew up observant. How do you interact with the world? You work in an office or you work with other people that are not. And they may laugh or they may not understand. Why do you leave Friday early to go for Shabbos or other? So how do you deal with that? Do you explain it Do you ignore them? Do you try to inspire? So these are, in my opinion, excellent questions. They're about real life. How do you integrate godliness into a life that the people in your circle, in your sphere of influence, and your family and others that you are interact with are part of it, or some way part of it. This is also true. Children who become more observant and their parents are not. Sometimes the other way around. There's a lot to say, but it's all case by case. Every story is another story.
Thank you. That's helpful. So you think that the thing to do then is to really, I don't have like a specific mashpia, like.
Well, maybe it's
is
time to
that,
get one.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Rabbi.
I have two questions, but they're also my suggestions for answers. So the first one is, why don't the Chabad or Kahas in general do more for Sheva Mitzvah, since the Rebbe you mentioned last week was so big about it? There's like some fringe, groups maybe that are doing it, but not mainstream. And especially, I happen to have heard the speech that the Rebbe gave about moment of silence, that he was addressing the kids, Dafka, that there should be like a campaign on Instagram or TikTok to the kids, to the American kids about God. And why doesn't Chabad do that?
Well, I can't speak for Chabad. I can speak for myself. I don't represent Chabad. And Chabad is very decentralized. People all over the place, different Chabad rabbis. Each one runs their community, and they don't really they interact with each other, but there's no one leader that tells everybody what to do. So there are some Chabad rabbis that are more involved, more are not involved. You ask me, I can tell you what I do. I could only speak for myself, or for those that, everybody has to speak for themselves. The Rebbe did speak about it at length. Actually, they're having a session at the Kinnus, a serious session on this. I'm the keynote speaker on that in a few weeks on Thursday here all the shluchim come together. There are shluchim who are trying to bring awareness to other shluchim how important it is. For many shluchim, they're busy with their work, and they'll say, it's hard enough for me to deal with the Jews I'm dealing with. And they just don't, and many don't know what to do or how to do. So I'm not justifying. I think it's something the Rebbe made a major emphasis on. It's very much connected to Mashiach, which is global. And the Rebbe was ahead of his time, like often is the case. And people have not really caught up. In my case, I deal with it all the time. Most of my work actually relates to non-Jews as much as to Jews. Most of the teachings I do. There are classes I do that are more text-based or advanced, but there are many non-Jews that listen to this class, by the way, just for the record. And there are other programs that I do. My relationship with President Milei, he's not Jewish, and the relationship I have with many, many people on YouTube. I'm not here to talk about myself. I'm just saying I do what I can do, and I think it should be something that should be on the agenda. But again, I can't speak for any group, including Chabad. I can speak for myself or what I think should be done. There are many things that could be done. And I think it's a tremendous opportunity today, especially because there's a real wake-up call. People are very receptive. So I think so.
Also, your book, Towards a Meaningful Life, gets into a lot of hands. And I also want to add one thing, Meretz Hashem, in your thing, the way a shliach could influence Jews who are so besotted with the non-Jewish culture is to change the non-Jewish culture. So the non-Jew, if they're so amazed with the non-Jewish culture.
Agreed. If like I always say, if every Jew kept the Sheva Mitzvahs Bnei Noach, we'd have Mashiach here already.
Yeah, but I'm saying it's derech akifa to get to the Jews is to get to the non-Jews. Anyway.
I agree. Most Jews, I think you're totally right. I think the Jewish world lives in a non-Jewish culture, and we've had effect. But I totally agree. It's about lifting the standard for all people. Absolutely.
Thank you. And then I'm so happy, by the way, to hear that there's going to be a talk and a workshop about it. Baruch Hashem, it should be good news. And then the other question / suggestion that I have is, what you spoke about last Friday about the fissure between the secular and the non-secular. I happen to know because my mother grew up in Israeli culture, and I speak fluent Hebrew, so I have Israeli friends and whatever. That one of the big gripes that Israeli culture has against is they don't want kfiyah datit. Kfiyah datit, it was like written into the constitution by the founders.
That means a religious coercion. In other words, to force people to keep Shabbos or kosher and so on, right?
And no one ever argued back that what they're doing is kfiyah chilonit, because the fact that they're taking away authentic religious teachings from regular schools in the country is actually imposing chiloniyut on people. And yeah, if the secular complain that the religious don't want to join the army and they don't want to take part in, fighting for the country, maybe they should send their kids to yeshiva 2 years, and they're, each one should do the same thing. So that's my question.
Okay,
That why?
Look, I agree with you that both, whenever it takes two to tango, whenever you have this type of conflicts, sad conflicts, it's coming from both directions. The religious definitely are not behaving the way they should with the non-religious. They look at them as goyim.
Adaryanim.
Yeah, and they dismiss them, condescending, and so on. The secular misunderstand the religious, and many of them don't like them. And the religious feed that animosity as well, because ask an average secular Jew in Israel, Chiloni, and I have done this, they'll say, for religious, they're not religious. All they want is money for their schools. That's all they want. It's politics. It's all politics. It means they don't even appreciate the so-called spirit of Yiddishkeit. And that is what, to me, that is what the Rebbe really underscored, emphasized, and that's what we should be teaching. Not leave me alone and don't draft me to the army. No, I want to share with you. Invite someone to your Shabbos table. Share the beauty and the soul of Judaism, because that's what connects us. It's not us versus them. We're one family. If it was your own brothers and sisters, and some of them were observant and some are not observant, how would you treat it? Would you treat them as an enemy? The problem is the foundation is not there. That element that we're one people. The only time we come together is when our enemies put us into a concentration camp or in a gas chamber, God forbid. That seems to be the only time where that equalizes us. Maybe, October 7th, even that I see, sadly, October 7th, I could see a religious person saying they deserved it. They were dancing on Shmini Atzeres in a music festival. I'm not saying anyone said it, and I don't even want to say it out loud, but the whole foundations of Avos Yisrael and the love for each other, and all the misunderstandings that result from that. I mean, it's very clear to me what's missing here.
The thing is that from Jews, the thing is with from Jews is that they listen to their rabbis, and so if we want to get to the community,
the rabbis are the problem. The rabbis are part of the problem.
Exactly. So if we want to make Geula happen and get to Mashiach times, why isn't there a closed door meeting with all the rabbinic leaders? And we talk about the Baal Shem Tov, and we talk about what the Baal Shem Tov said, that every
God
Jew is
bless
worth.
you. Try it out.
Well,
I think it would be easier to get together the non-Jewish leaders, and like you said, the Sheva Mitzvah Nech to me is easier than getting the rabbis together.
But even if we start with whoever agrees to the
anyway, why don't you go ahead, try it out?
So maybe the period begins at the top. Maybe that's Dafka the problem. I mean,
that is the problem. Of course, that's the problem.
Yeah.
That's why maybe Hashem doesn't have a Beis Hamikdash and a Sanhedrin, because he doesn't trust the people on the top.
Couldn't there be aren't the rabbis at the top friendly with each other? Couldn't they make a meeting together?
Go for it. What should I tell you?
Me?
Who? Me? I'm not involved in this.
Let's do the Siyum. Let's do it.
We have to do what we can do, for sure. You were here Friday when I spoke about this. You saw how I was quite harsh. I
listened on YouTube. Yeah, I heard it on YouTube.
Quite harsh about the demonstration was organized by leaders, not by the grassroots.
I know, that's what I'm saying. The leaders should get together.
Their whole attitude to Judaism is distorted. in my view. They don't even know the Aleph Beis. It's like, to me,
But what are you going to do about it?
what I do now, I teach classes. I keep teaching, bringing light wherever I can, and hopefully people will listen, and those that could will listen. I don't know what to do on the political front and how to get to those individuals. You work with the people you have. Hopefully, maybe there'll be a grassroots surge, an uprising, a revolution.
They don't rebel against the rabbis. It's very sacred to listen to your rabbis.
Yeah, well, I don't know about their Yetzer Haras. Also listen to their rabbis.
Yeah, but those people who are Yetzer Hara, it's a problem because they don't watch YouTube. The rabbis are not going to watch YouTube.
It's not about rabbis. It's about a culture that's like almost like a cult. That has nothing to do with God or with Judaism, just for the record. If you want me to state it bluntly.
Right, but there's like as shluchim, let's say in Israel, there's shluchim in Israel that maybe have a relationship with leaders in Israel,
Okay, but you're talking to the wrong person. You go talk to them. I have nothing to do with that. I'm not even going to waste my time there. To me, I don't see any. I do my thing. I'll say what I have to say. Nobody tells me what to say. Thank God, I have no censorship. And it doesn't mean I don't agree with you. The question is what you're going to do about it. Yeah.
Rabbi, I actually was asking about the personal advice for the people who are far away. They might not even be religious, but they never were submerged in this Western culture where everything permissible, and you can find all kind of deviation relationship. They might, let's say, I came from a small village in the mountains. I was not religious. I didn't have a background of religion, but I still had some kind of point of view how this world functioned. And I never had in my nightmare could see all kind of deviation that I came here and all of a sudden I found one of my friend is a psychologist who advised how to get relationship in the same sex marriage. Another thing, like all of a sudden, when I ask ladies to light the candles, you know what I found? That few of them were actually not women. And such kind of thing can kill.
So what do you ask? So what is there a question here, or you just
know what should be my response
exactly
to myself?
The same thing what I do. You teach, you try to communicate, you try to reach people who are responsive and receptive, and that's what you do. You share with them ideas, you share with them thoughts. You ask me a quick fix, I have no quick fix for this. There's no pill you can take. There's no button you can press. You teach, you continue spreading light, hopefully engage them, try to speak things that intrigue, give them something to read, and you continue the work that we all do. This is what I face this in different ways. We all face similar scenarios. This is the world in which we live. So either we wring our hands and just cry out, I don't know what to do, but I don't believe that's a victim. We have to be proactive, make things happen. We have to be proactive, take initiative, and see, God bless you. Instead of just bemoaning how bad the situation is, what am I doing to help the situation in every given situation? And that's the only way. I don't have another solution. Why is that not the right approach? Why is that? What's lacking there? What are you looking for that I did not say?
Just to have a balance between be tolerant and creative like this.
Tolerant is the word. It's to be inspiring. It's to try to be a part of the solution, not part of the problem. by sharing, by inviting, by welcoming, by teaching. Every possible way you can do that. Every one of us has our own way of doing that.
Okay. Thank you.
I didn't say it's not frustrating, but I just don't know a better way to go about it. Yeah. Okay, very good. Thank you for good questions. Well, I'm going to conclude now after these questions. Let's end this recording.